Don't you love me anymore?
Yes, I love you more than ever, Richard.
When The Blue Lagoon hit theaters, it wasn't just a movie, it was a phenomenon. And at the center of it all stood Christopher Atkins, barely known one day, a global obsession the next. But while the world was mesmerized by his talent, something far darker and more complicated was happening behind the scenes. Christopher was just 18. The pressure was immense, the choices were extremely controversial, and the story was not what most fans ever realized. Why did the studio push so hard to keep certain truths quiet? Decades later, the cracks in the perfect fantasy are finally starting to show. From teen athlete to global sensation. When most people think of the Blue Lagoon, they remember the sun-drenched beaches, the innocent romance, and the image of two beautiful teenagers growing up in paradise. But what the camera didn't show was the chaos, discomfort, and quiet pressure happening just outside the frame. While the world saw a fantasy, the reality behind the scenes was far messier than you could have imagined. Before Christopher Atkins ever stepped in front of a movie camera, his future seemed headed in an entirely different direction. In high school, he was known not for acting or modeling, but for his athletic ability. A talented baseball player with serious potential, Atkins had ambitions of playing professionally. But those plans came to a halt when a knee injury ended his sports career before it could truly begin. What started as a major disappointment would eventually redirect his life in a way no one, including himself, could have predicted. After the injury, Atkins didn't turn to acting right away. In fact, he had no formal background or even serious interest in show business at the time. His first step into the spotlight came when he started modeling. Thanks to his good looks and natural presence in front of a camera, he quickly landed work, appearing in 17 magazine and doing print ads for brands like Gloria Vanderbilt. These early jobs helped him gain experience with cameras and lighting, but they were never meant to be a long-term career. At most, he saw them as a temporary opportunity while figuring out his next move. His life changed almost overnight when a unique casting process flipped his life upside down. Atkins was working as a sailing instructor in upstate New York when he got the kind of opportunity most actors dream of, and he wasn't even trying to act. Director Randall Kleiser, fresh off the success of Grease, was looking for fresh faces to star in his next film, The Blue Lagoon, a romantic survival story set on a deserted tropical island. Kleiser was searching for authenticity. He wanted actors who could portray the innocence and vulnerability of two young characters growing up in complete isolation from society. Christopher Atkins had no resume, no film training, and no acting connections in Hollywood. But he fit the physical description of the male lead, Richard Lestrange, and had the right energy that Kleiser believed could translate well on screen. According to production accounts, thousands of hopefuls auditioned for the part. Yet somehow, against all odds, Atkins was selected. His casting came as a surprise not just to the public later on, but to people in the industry who expected someone with more traditional experience to land the role. Atkins later admitted he had no idea what he was getting into, but he was determined to make it work. His lack of experience, while risky, gave his performance a certain rawness that fit the film's tone. He was new to everything, from camera cues to memorizing lines and hitting marks, but he threw himself into it, learning as he went. From that moment forward, he went from being a local sailing instructor to leading one of the most talked-about films of the year. The Blue Lagoon wasn't just a random movie. It was an adaptation of a well-known 1908 novel written by Henry de Vere Stackpoole. The story had already been adapted into silent and early sound films in the past, but this version aimed to bring the material to modern audiences with a more visually captivating and emotionally intense approach. The plot followed two young children who, after surviving a shipwreck, grow up alone on a tropical island, eventually reaching puberty and discovering love and desire without any guidance from the outside world. Filming such a story required a level of sensitivity, especially because it dealt with coming-of-age themes that pushed boundaries. The film featured scenes that made many viewers uncomfortable, and some critics accused it of exploiting its young stars, particularly Brooke Shields, who was just 14 during filming. But despite the backlash, the film generated massive public interest. The setting, the love story, and the bold marketing helped it become a box office hit. Made on a modest budget of $4.5 million, The Blue Lagoon went on to earn nearly $59 million in American theaters alone. That kind of return on investment was significant, especially for a film that featured two mostly unknown leads and took creative risks. It quickly became one of the top 10 highest-grossing movies of 1980, cementing its place in pop culture and launching both Atkins and Shields into international fame. For Atkins, the success was especially overwhelming. With just one film under his belt, he received a Golden Globe nomination for New Star of the Year. Suddenly, he was a household name, featured in magazines, talk shows, and promotional campaigns. He had entered the industry with no roadmap, yet within a year, he had one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. One of the most important elements of the film was the chemistry between Atkins and Shields. Since much of the story revolved around their emotional bond and closeness, the success of the movie depended heavily on how believable their connection appeared. But behind the scenes, it wasn't as effortless as it looked. While both were legally allowed to appear in the film, their age difference and the sensitive nature of their scenes meant that everything had to be handled with extreme care. The filmmakers worked hard to ensure that the actors were comfortable and protected, especially Shields, whose young age became a major talking point in the media after the film's release. Director Randall Kleiser reportedly took extra steps to help the actors build rapport before filming began. He encouraged them to spend time together off-camera in a relaxed setting, hoping it would lead to more natural interactions on screen. One unique approach involved placing a photograph of Brooke Shields above Christopher Atkins' bed while they were on location. The idea was to help him form a mental and emotional connection with her character, since their relationship was central to the story. Because of these efforts, their performances came across as sincere and believable, even though the circumstances of the shoot were far from ordinary. What many viewers didn't realize when watching The Blue Lagoon was how difficult the experience had been for those involved, especially Atkins. On the surface, he appeared to be living the dream, starring in a successful film, earning critical recognition, and becoming a teen idol practically overnight. But what went on behind the camera was far more complex than most fans ever imagined. What you didn't see in The Blue Lagoon. Filming The Blue Lagoon might have looked like a dream from the outside, but for those on set it was anything but. The entire shoot was designed to feel natural and untouched, but that came at a cost. The production team wanted authenticity, so instead of using studio sets or comfortable locations, they flew the cast and crew to Turtle Island, a remote part of Fiji. The island was stunning, no doubt, but it was also isolated, underdeveloped, and filled with unexpected challenges. To keep things as realistic as possible, the cast and crew lived on the island for about 5 months. There were no fancy trailers, air conditioning, or catered meals. Instead, they slept in tents, used makeshift facilities, and lived with no running water. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was physically and mentally exhausting. The weather was unpredictable. Supplies were limited, and medical help was hours away by boat or plane. One of the most serious incidents during the shoot involved Brooke Shields falling ill. She contracted pneumonia at one point, a situation that could have become life-threatening given their remote location. While she eventually recovered, the health scare showed how little margin for error existed on a set so far removed from basic infrastructure. The production had taken a bold approach by filming in the wild, but that choice also came with real risks. There were also serious issues with pests and sanitation. The island's beauty masked the fact that it was overrun with rats. Crew members reportedly struggled to keep their equipment clean and their living spaces hygienic. Some nights the rats were so persistent that people barely slept. This added another layer of fatigue to an already demanding environment. For young actors like Atkins and Shields, who were not seasoned professionals, it was a jarring way to begin their careers. But beyond the physical conditions, the emotional toll of the shoot was equally intense. Both leads were teenagers, and the storyline required them to act out scenes that dealt with puberty, all while under a microscope, both from the crew and the public. For Shields in particular, the experience was difficult. She later shared that there was subtle and constant pressure to build a real-life romantic connection with Atkins off-screen. The film's producers and even the director believed that if the two young stars formed a genuine bond, it would enhance the believability of their performances. But Shields resisted that idea. She was quite young and, more importantly, didn't feel a natural connection with her co-star beyond friendship. Trying to force chemistry off-camera only made things more awkward, especially when paired with the already challenging circumstances they were filming under. Atkins had his own difficulties adjusting to the environment. In later interviews, he described the experience as double culture shock. He had gone from suburban American life to being cast for the first time ever in a major motion picture, and not just any movie, but one filmed in an extremely remote and primitive setting. He wasn't just learning how to act, he was doing it in near-survivalist conditions. On top of the daily demands of performing, he had to adjust to the pace and discomfort of island life with limited support or resources. That kind of transition would be hard for anyone, let alone an 18-year-old with no prior acting experience. His days were filled with memorizing lines, performing in difficult natural elements, and trying to navigate the pressure of sudden fame that hadn't even fully arrived yet. But that's not all. There were the ethical questions, particularly around how the production treated its environment. One of the darker revelations about the film came years later, when Shields revealed that during filming, several animals were treated unfairly while trying to make the island survival storyline more believable. At the time, animal rights in film weren't under the kind of spotlight they are today, but even by 1980 standards, the incidents were troubling. There was no public outcry during the film's release, largely because these details were hidden from the audience. But for those on set, it left an impression, one that Shields carried into adulthood. This behind-the-scenes experience was a far cry from the story that appeared on screen. While viewers saw a pair of teenagers growing up in a romanticized version of Eden, the actual journey was shaped by sickness, discomfort, emotional pressure, and questionable decisions. It was a shoot that asked a lot from its young stars physically, emotionally, and ethically. What's even more surprising is how little of this was ever revealed at the time. The film was marketed as an innocent, dreamy love story. The trailers focused on sunsets and slow-motion beach walks. The controversies were carefully avoided in press interviews, and the behind-the-scenes struggles were kept away from public view. For years, most fans had no idea what really happened during filming. But once the movie became a global phenomenon and the young actors were thrown into the spotlight, more questions began to surface about the film's production choices, the pressures placed on the cast, and the line between storytelling and exploitation. And that's where things get even more complicated: the storm around the lagoon. By the time the Blue Lagoon hit theaters in 1980, the film had already become a topic of heated discussion, not just because of its unusual storyline or tropical backdrop, but because of the very young age of one of its stars, Brooke Shields. The film's narrative centered on the relationship between two cousins who grow up together on a deserted island, eventually forming a bond that mirrors that of a romantic partnership. But what was meant to be a poetic portrayal of innocence and discovery quickly drew widespread criticism for how it presented that journey, especially with a minor in the lead role. Although the filmmakers took visible steps to maintain boundaries, such as using body doubles and special costuming, audiences and critics alike were unsettled by the implications of certain scenes. Shields wore protective costumes during filming, and for full-body scenes, adult doubles were used to ensure legal and logistical protection. But even with these precautions, the visual presentation of the story led many to question whether it had crossed a line, especially considering the actress's age at the time of production. In contrast, Christopher Atkins, who was 18 when the film was shot, wasn't as protected in such scenes. Although his involvement was legally permitted, it highlighted a noticeable difference in how each character's role was handled in the final edit. Some critics felt the film lingered too long on certain moments that weren't essential to the storyline, and that the overall tone pushed the boundaries of what was appropriate, especially in the context of a mainstream release that marketed itself as a coming-of-age love story. As discussions around the film grew louder, they quickly moved beyond theaters and into the halls of government. In 1981, just a year after the Blue Lagoon's release, Brooke Shields was asked to speak before a congressional committee. The hearing was part of a larger conversation taking place at the time, about how young people were portrayed in film and advertising. Lawmakers were becoming increasingly concerned that entertainment companies were prioritizing shock value or visual appeal over the well-being and dignity of young performers. Though the hearing did not result in a specific law, it played a major role in elevating the issue of youth protection in the entertainment industry. Shields and her legal team insisted that proper steps had been taken to ensure her safety and comfort during production, and that artistic decisions had been made thoughtfully. Still, many remained unconvinced, especially given the fact that this wasn't Shields' first controversial role. Just 2 years earlier, she had starred in Pretty Baby, a historical drama in which she portrayed a young girl raised in a red-light district. Though the film was critically recognized and directed by a respected filmmaker, its subject matter reignited debates about how far a film should go when involving young actors. That earlier role, combined with her presence in the Blue Lagoon, gave many the impression that the young star was being repeatedly placed in situations far beyond her age. Adding to the controversy was a series of fashion advertisements that Shields appeared in shortly after The Blue Lagoon was released. In one particularly famous campaign for Calvin Klein, a suggestive slogan sparked a media firestorm. The commercial became a cultural flashpoint. Two major networks, CBS and ABC, refused to air the ads altogether, citing concerns that the tone and messaging were too inappropriate. These back-to-back controversies created a narrative around Shields that she had little control over. Even though she was one of the most recognizable young faces in Hollywood, the conversation around her fame was increasingly focused on whether the roles and campaigns she was part of were appropriate, or whether they were designed to generate controversy and attention at her expense. But the criticism didn't stop with age-related concerns. The actual storyline of The Blue Lagoon came under fire as well. In the film, the two lead characters, Emmeline and Richard, are first cousins. While this was accurate to the original 1908 novel the film was based on, and not unusual for the Victorian era in which it was set, it struck a nerve with modern audiences. The idea of a romantic relationship developing between cousins made many viewers uncomfortable. For some, it added another layer of unease to a film that was already facing serious criticism over its casting and thematic content. The production tried to stay ahead of the controversy by leaning into the lost innocence framing of the story. The two characters, it was argued, didn't grow up in society, had no moral compass imposed on them, and were simply navigating life the only way they knew how. But despite those explanations, the combination of their young age, the family connection, and the emotional nature of the scenes left a lasting impression that was hard to overlook. Years later, audiences and critics would revisit The Blue Lagoon with a more modern lens. And while some appreciated it as a time capsule of 1980s filmmaking and a bold attempt to merge naturalistic storytelling with classic literature, others saw it as a cautionary tale of how young performers can be caught in the middle of adult decisions. For Shields, it would take decades to fully reclaim her image. Even long after moving on to college, modeling, and other film roles, questions about her early career continued to follow her. For both actors, The Blue Lagoon was a career-defining project, but one defined just as much by the reaction to it as by the work itself. While the film succeeded commercially, it had sparked debates that would follow its stars for years. What was meant to be a visual poem about isolation, growth, and young love had instead opened the door to serious, ongoing conversations about creative responsibility, youth in media, and where to draw the line. The result was a unique kind of fame that was powerful but heavy, instant stardom mixed with cultural backlash. And as time went on, it became clear that behind the smiling interviews and red carpet photos, both stars, especially Christopher Atkins, were carrying burdens the public never fully understood. Because while The Blue Lagoon made him famous overnight, it also placed him at the center of attention he wasn't fully prepared for. And after the lights faded and the cameras moved on, he faced a series of personal struggles that changed everything. Christopher's struggles behind the fame. By the time The Blue Lagoon had cemented Christopher Atkins as a teenage heartthrob, he was riding high on a wave of fame few young actors get to experience. But like many overnight success stories, the fall from the top came just as fast and was far more brutal. What fans didn't see behind that iconic blonde hair and Beach Boy charm was a young man spiraling into chaos, trying to hold on to a life that fame had never prepared him for. Christopher's early stardom brought in money, more money than most people his age could imagine. He had multiple movie deals, modeling campaigns, and appearances, and he was in high demand, but he wasn't equipped for it. Like many actors who found fame young, he handed over financial control to people he thought he could trust. One of them was his manager. According to Atkins, this manager, who had access to nearly every financial decision, embezzled close to $500,000 from him. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. Atkins said it felt like having your whole life pulled out from under you, and in many ways it was. The money vanished, and with it, the illusion that he was untouchable. For someone who had grown up relatively sheltered and suddenly found himself a household name, the crash was devastating. The lavish lifestyle, the security, the future he thought he was building, it all disappeared almost overnight. And while $500,000 might not be catastrophic for a major A-lister today, for a young actor in the 1980s, whose fame was already starting to cool, it was crippling. The betrayal left deep scars. He would later admit it taught him a painful lesson, that in Hollywood, trust was dangerous currency. But the financial loss was just the beginning, because in 1986, Christopher hit a breaking point. With his career slowing, his confidence shaken, and his finances in ruin, he turned to alcohol. What started as a way to cope quickly became something much darker. He spiraled into what he described as an alcohol-related breakdown, a collapse that left him emotionally shattered. He didn't hide from it. Years later, he'd speak openly about his experience, not to earn sympathy, but to show others they weren't alone. He entered rehab and began the long, painful climb out of addiction. He credits his family, especially his children, for helping him stay focused on recovery. Today, he's celebrating over 2 decades of sobriety. That alone, for Christopher, is one of his proudest achievements. In an industry where temptations are everywhere and support can be scarce, choosing to heal and stay clean took strength most people never saw behind his blue eyes and sun-kissed smile. But recovery didn't instantly fix everything. After the Blue Lagoon, the offers slowed. While Brooke Shields continued to grow her career, eventually becoming a beloved TV star and respected public figure, Christopher struggled. He was grateful for the fame, but it also became a kind of prison. Casting directors couldn't see past his image as the pretty, shirtless island boy. He was typecast. Scripts that came his way rarely strayed from the teen heartthrob mold, and the roles that might have shown his range went to other rising stars. The 1980s moved on, and Hollywood moved on without him. He admitted at one point that he felt jealous of Brooke Shields' continued success, not in a bitter or resentful way, but as someone who knew they had once shared the same spotlight. They had launched from the same film. But while her trajectory took her up, his took a much quieter path, marked by indie films, TV cameos, and a career that never fully recovered its momentum. It's a difficult feeling for anyone to sit with, watching someone else take the elevator to the top floor while you're stuck in the lobby, holding the same ticket, and just as things were calming down professionally, personal heartbreak hit. Christopher had married Lynn Barron, an Australian model, in 1985. Their wedding was a private affair compared to Hollywood standards, and they worked hard to keep their family life grounded. They had 2 children, and for a while it seemed like Christopher had found the stability he always wanted. But fame has a way of following you home, even when the cameras are off. The pressures of Hollywood, financial instability, and his own personal demons put a strain on the marriage. In 2007, after over 2 decades together, they quietly divorced. For Atkins, it was yet another chapter that ended not with a bang, but with a quiet ache. He remained close to his children and focused on being a present father, something he said helped anchor him when nothing else could. He may not be on every red carpet or magazine cover anymore, but Christopher Atkins didn't vanish. He evolved. And today, his life looks nothing like the glossy illusion Hollywood once projected. Life after the Blue Lagoon. When the sun finally set on the Blue Lagoon, it could have easily taken Christopher Atkins' career with it. For many, he remained frozen in time, the sun-kissed teenage castaway on a beach. But while Hollywood seemed to move on without him, Christopher didn't stay lost at sea forever. He took matters into his own hands, and instead of chasing a spotlight that no longer chased him back, Christopher decided to build something tangible. He launched a custom luxury pool business in California, combining his eye for aesthetics with his passion for water. The boy who once survived on a deserted island was now helping others create personal paradises of their own. But that wasn't all. He also co-developed the Strike Jacket, a fishing lure that generated some quiet buzz in outdoor circles. It wasn't a flashy comeback, but it was a clever one. Hollywood came calling again in 2009 with Confessions of a Teen Idol, a reality TV show that brought together former teen stars trying to make sense of their fame or recapture it. Christopher joined the cast with a mix of openness and nostalgia, admitting that for years he had tried to distance himself from the film that defined him. And for the first time, he wasn't the pretty boy or the washed-up icon. He was just a man looking for peace, perspective, and maybe one more chance. These days, Christopher Atkins speaks with clarity and candor about the storm he once sailed through. He doesn't dodge the uncomfortable topics of fame at a young age, money lost, roles missed, and mistakes made. But he also doesn't dwell in bitterness. Instead, he's found a kind of grace. In interviews, he talks about how being a teen idol was never the problem, losing control was. And today, he finally feels in control of his choices, his story, and his legacy. What do you think? Did the Blue Lagoon cross a line by placing two teenagers in such controversial roles? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.